She lives inside you, not as a memory, but as a presential, persistent, formative. Long after her voice has faded from your ears, the echo of her gaze, her silence, her approval or absence still moves through your psyche like weather through a field. This is not the outer mother, not the woman herself, but the internal figure that grew in her image. Jung called it a complex, Marie-Louise von Franz called it a psychic reality, and it governs more of your life than you dare to admit. The inner mother is not just the woman who raised you. She is a living structure in the unconscious, an image born from early impressions, but soon mythologized by the soul. Her tone becomes your inner monologue. Her warmth or withdrawal becomes your blueprint for love. Her limitations, internalized without question, become the edges of your own becoming. You speak with her voice. You shrink in her shadow. You seek her in lovers, mentors, gods, and until she is seen for what she truly is, an inherited image, not a destiny, you will never be fully your own. Von Franz wrote, "One cannot individuate unless one withdraws the projections from the mother." To withdraw is not to forget. It is not to erase her story. It is to see clearly, because when the inner mother is not brought into consciousness, she becomes your compass without your consent. You believe you're choosing, but you are echoing. You believe you've broken free, but her rules still whisper in your silence. She shows up in the moments you silence yourself, in the guilt you feel for saying no, in the shame that clings to your desire to be seen. She shows up when you downplay your joy, when you long for permission, when you abandon your truth to avoid her imagined disapproval. And the cruelest part is this: you may think it's you. You may call it humility, discipline, kindness, but it's her fear, her story, her grip. The inner mother is not a ghost. She is a system, a psychic architecture laid down in childhood and left unexamined through adulthood. She's not waiting in the past. She's guiding your present, and she will continue to do so until you turn around, meet her face, and name her influence. This is where the work begins. Not in blaming her, not in worshiping her, but in seeing her. The mother inside is not an enemy, but she is not your truth either. And unless you bring her into the light, your life will remain shaped by her shadow. Marie-Louise von Franz did not write for the intellect alone, she wrote for the soul. Where Jung mapped the terrain of the unconscious, von Franz descended into its depths with lantern in hand, illuminating the forgotten corners of the psyche with a clarity that was both brutal and tender. Her work was not theoretical abstraction. It was myth come alive, dream made conscious. She understood that the inner world is not metaphor but reality of it, autonomous and demanding of reverence. She taught that we are not ruled by logic, but by images, archetypes, complexes, inner figures that live within us like ancient deities, shaping the way we feel, choose, and relate. The anima and animus, the contrasexual archetypes, were to her not philosophical ideas but psychic forces with voices, faces, longings. She saw these inner characters as real as any person, more real, in fact, because they do not leave when we close our eyes. They follow us from dream to waking life, influencing every encounter and emotion. Among these inner forces, the mother complex stood as one of the most difficult and sacred to face. Von Franz understood that the image of the mother, once internalized, becomes more than memory, it becomes myth. A living psychic construct that we carry not only from our personal childhood, but from the collective unconscious. The mother becomes not just a woman, but an entire emotional atmosphere, climate of soul that governs how we experience safety, love, nourishment, and self-worth. She warned that this complex is not always cruel or loud. Sometimes it is soft, almost invisible, a gentle command to stay small, a quiet guilt that rises when we begin to separate. She saw how even the most independent lives could still be tethered to the inner mother's gaze, still seeking her blessing before daring to become real. And this is why she placed such gravity on the task of confronting the mother image, not in blame, but in liberation. For von Franz, the work of individuation required nothing less than the retrieval of one's soul from the web of inherited emotion. The mother complex, she taught, is not only about your mother, it is about your capacity to stand as yourself. She did not promise ease, she promised truth. That to face the inner mother, to speak with her in dreams, to draw her out of the unconscious and into the light, is to reclaim your voice from her silence. It is to step across a threshold that cannot be crossed in comfort, only in courage. And without that crossing, she knew, the self would remain a ghost behind the mother's shadow, waiting for a freedom that only confrontation can grant. The mother complex is not a wound you remember, it is a pattern you live. Marie-Louise von Franz knew this intimately. She taught that the mother complex is not merely a product of early experience, but a psychic inheritance, a living structure within the unconscious that acts upon you, silently and with precision. Like an invisible law, it is not the mother herself, but the energy she carried, the emotional code you absorbed before you had words, and that code, unless brought into awareness, becomes your instinctual blueprint for intimacy, identity, and survival. At its core, the mother complex is paradox. It carries the energy of the womb and the web, the nurturing one who offers safety, warmth, life, and the devouring one who swallows autonomy, binds the soul, and crushes differentiation. Von Franz did not moralize this polarity. She saw it as a sacred tension and archetypal truth. The Great Mother, she explained, has always held two faces. One gives birth, the other refuses to let go. You may experience this duality without ever naming it. You long for connection, and yet pull away the moment it comes too close. You hunger for approval and feel smothered by it at the same time. You build your life around freedom, but a part of you still whispers that to separate is betrayal. These contradictions are not flaws in your character, they are the fingerprints of a complex operating beneath consciousness, replaying the emotional rhythm of the early maternal bond. In relationships, the mother complex is especially insidious. It does not ask if the partner is right for you. It asks whether they reflect the emotional terrain that is familiar. The partner who withholds affection, the one who engulfs, the one who mirrors your mother's silence or control, these are not accidents. The complex selects them, not to torment you, but to complete an unfinished story. And without awareness, you will call it love. You will call it fate. Von Franz insisted that, unless this complex is seen, it remains sovereign. It chooses who you trust, how you bond, what you fear. It makes you mistake loyalty for love, guilt for responsibility, self-abandonment for virtue. And in this web, the adult ego, however competent, however independent, remains emotionally tethered to the child within, still orbiting the mother's gravitational field, still waiting for permission to become whole. The mother complex does not resolve itself with time. It does not dissolve because the outer mother has aged, softened, or passed away. It lives inside, and it must be faced there. Von Franz knew this work was sacred. To untangle the web, to step beyond the emotional spell of the complex, is to return to the womb, not to stay but to leave it, not in rejection, but in rebirth, not to destroy the mother, but to reclaim the self. You were not born into silence. You were born into a story already in motion, a river of longing and limitation that did not begin with you. Before you spoke your first word, before you even had a self to protect, you were absorbing 1,000 unspoken truths from the woman who carried you, not just her love but her loneliness, not just her care but her compromise. This is the ancestral echo, what Jung called the unlived life of the parent, and Marie-Louise von Franz understood it as a haunting, a ghost passed down through generations, not to scare, but to bind. The mother's unlived life is not something she tells you about, it is something she transmits. In her silence, you learned what could not be spoken. In her sadness, you learned what could not be mourned. She may have loved you deeply, even fiercely, but love does not cancel inheritance. What she could not become, you learned to carry, not by choice, but by identification. The child, desperate to stay connected, takes on what was too heavy for her to hold. This is how the transmission occurs, not through stories, but through shadows. The dreams she gave up, the grief she buried, the fire she extinguished for the sake of duty, safety, or someone else's comfort. You watched her dim and believed it was survival. You saw her shrink and learned it was love. And without knowing it, you began to weave her unfulfilled life into the fabric of your own. Von Franz called this psychic entanglement. It is not a conscious imitation, it is deeper. You may find yourself hesitating at the edge of success, retreating at the moment of intimacy, silencing your truth just as it begins to rise. You do not know why, you just feel it. The pull, a grief that is not yours, a weight you cannot name. The mother's unlived life still moving through your nervous system, still echoing through your decisions, your fears, your voice. This is not blame, this is lineage. No mother is free from history. She too inherited burdens from her mother, and her mother before her, each generation, carrying what the last could not resolve. The sorrow becomes sacred, the silence becomes scripture. until someone chooses to listen, until someone, perhaps you, turns inward and begins the painful task of disidentification, not to reject her, but to release her. Von Franz knew that true freedom requires this rupture. You must name what is not yours. You must return the sorrow to its source, not in cruelty, but in clarity. Only then can you begin to hear your own voice beneath the echo. Only then does the ancestral spell begin to break, and in its place, something new is born, not a repetition, but a life. Not as a daughter of pain, but as the author of healing. The psyche cannot bear contradiction without cost. When the mother's love is mixed with fear, her care tangled with control, the child's mind splits the image into one to worship, the other to fear. This is the split between the ideal mother and the shadow mother, a rupture that does not heal with time, only deepens in silence. Marie-Louise von Franz warned of this fracture, not as a moral failing, but as a natural defense. The child cannot hold the complexity, so she chooses illusion over truth, and that illusion becomes the prison. The ideal mother is the one you protect, the one you defend even from your own pain. She is the giver, the sacrifice, the holy one. To criticize her feels like betrayal. To question her feels like blasphemy. And yet somewhere deeper, repressed and unlanguaged, lives the other face, the shadow mother. The one who wounded with her absence, who punished with her shame, who wrapped love in 1,000 conditions. She is buried in dreams, in panic attacks, in the tightness in your throat when you try to speak your truth. Von Franz saw this split not as pathological, but archetypal. The psyche, she taught, will inflate one side and repress the other when it cannot hold both. Psychic inflation means the ideal mother becomes larger than life, flawless, untouchable. And with that inflation comes guilt, paralysis, and a deep resistance to separation. You cannot become whole if the part of you that aches to be free still believes it would destroy her by doing so. The danger lies in extremes. When the ideal mother dominates consciousness, the ego remains infantilized, obedient, apologetic, afraid to risk. When the shadow mother is projected outward, relationships turn toxic. You see your boss as controlling, your partner as cold, your teacher as critical, but really, it is her, the repressed face of the maternal image, leaking into the world through projection, and the cycle continues. Not because you want it, but because you cannot yet hold the full picture. To heal, von Franz insisted, is to bring both images into awareness, not to judge them, but to integrate them. Your mother may have loved you, and failed you. She may have given what she could, and withheld what you needed. Both are true, and only when both are seen does the inner myth begin to dissolve. Integration does not mean resolving the contradiction. It means no longer running from it. The mother is not one thing, she is many, and to see her clearly is to finally stop splitting yourself in half, to preserve the fantasy. The psyche does not need perfection, it needs truth, and when you give it that, the war between good and evil softens into understanding. The illusion dies. The adult is born. She doesn't shout, but she governs. The inner mother, when distorted, does not come to you with cruelty. She comes as caution. She whispers in the voice of care, but it is a care laced with fear, guilt, and invisible rules. You feel her in the hesitation before you speak your truth, in the shrinking you do before someone else's disappointment. You call it humility, self-awareness, discipline, but it is something deeper, older. It is the internalized voice of a mother who could not separate her love from her fear. Marie-Louise von Franz spoke of this inner voice as a form of unconscious obedience. It is not loyalty to the mother as she was, but to the psychic image you built in her place, the one who required your silence, your shrinking, your sacrifice. She does not live in the past, she lives in your decisions, the job you don't apply for, the boundary you don't draw, the light you keep dim so no one is threatened by your glow. This is not coincidence. This is the inner saboteur disguised as safety. The critic inside is not abstract, it is intimate. It sounds like her. It uses her words. You hear it in the way you apologize for taking up space, in the way you flinch at your own needs, in the shame that rises the moment you begin to grow. Growth, to the distorted inner mother, is a threat. It means change. It means leaving. It means becoming someone she might not understand. So she pulls you back not with force, but with guilt. Who do you think you are? What will they think? Don't be selfish. Von Franz understood that this voice must be made conscious, or it will dictate your life while you call it fate. You will say you're not ready. You will say the timing is wrong. But underneath the delay is the echo of the mother's anxiety, her unspoken wish that you remain close, small, manageable. This is not love. This is fear, wearing the mask of love. The tragedy is that many never question it. They live entire lives under the silent command of a voice that no longer belongs to anyone living, and in doing so, they trade their soul for approval. They trade truth for peace. They trade possibility for familiarity. Individuation, the sacred task of becoming who you truly are, is postponed indefinitely. To become whole, von Franz taught, is to break this spell, to hear the voice and name it, to see the critic as a relic, not a compass, to understand that the inner mother, when unexamined, will always prefer survival over expression. But you were not born to repeat her limitations, you were born to complete what she could not begin, and that begins the moment you choose to disobey, not in defiance, but in devotion to the self she never got to be. You think you've left her behind. You think you've grown up, moved on, stepped into your own life, but then you find yourself in Lavande. Suddenly, you're small again. You're watching their face for signs of withdrawal. You're bending yourself to be acceptable. You're apologizing for needing too much. It doesn't make sense. This fear, this ache, but it's not new. It's old. It's the inner mother, wearing someone else's face. Marie-Louise von Franz warned us, when we do not confront our inner figures, we meet them outside in twisted form. What lives in the unconscious does not stay hidden, it seeks the world. It reaches outward, wraps itself in flesh and circumstance, and says, "This is love, this is truth," and so you believe it. You believe the partner who withholds affection is proof you are too much. You believe the mentor who never sees your worth confirms your unworthiness. You believe the authority figure who silences you is keeping you safe. But none of this is real. It is projection, the psyche's attempt to finish what was never resolved. The inner mother, when unmet within, becomes the blueprint for relationship. She is cast like a shadow onto others, and suddenly they are not who they are, but who you need them to be: savior, punisher, mirror. You are not falling in love, you are falling into a pattern. You are reenacting the emotional terrain of the past, hoping that if you get it right this time, it will heal. But projection cannot heal. It only repeats. Von Franz saw this especially in romantic entanglements that feel larger than life. The obsession, the dependency, the inexplicable fear of loss. It is rarely about the person in front of you. It is about the figure behind them, the mother who gave conditionally, the mother who abandoned, engulfed, or shamed. The inner child sees her again, and clings, not to love, but to the hope of repair. This dynamic isn't limited to romance. It seeps into spirituality, where gurus become gods and therapists become parents. It shows up in codependency, where helping becomes hiding, where merging becomes meaning. You lose yourself in the name of connection, but it is not connection, it is reenactment. You are not in the present, you are in the past with a new costume. To break the pattern, von Franz insisted, the projection must be withdrawn. You must see the other not as savior or villain, but as themselves. You must see yourself not as a child needing approval, but as an adult capable of presence. Only then does the mask fall. Only then does the mirror crack. Projection is not a failure. It is a message. It tells you where the work is. And the work is always the same. To turn inward. To meet the mother where she truly lives, not in others, but within you. That is where the healing begins. That is where the pattern ends. There comes a point when insight is not enough. You've traced the patterns, named the wounds, told the story again and again. But the mother still lives inside Jung, moved, unspoken, untouched by language. This is where Marie-Louise von Franz turned to one of Jung's most powerful tools, active imagination, not to analyze, but to enter, not to observe the inner mother from a distance, but to meet her face to face. Active imagination is not fantasy. It is a descent, a conscious dialogue with the unconscious. You do not make things up, you allow them to appear. You close your eyes, settle into the breath, and step inward. You do not force images. You wait, and when she comes, you do not look away. Sometimes she appears as a dragon, coiled and watchful, guarding something deep within. Sometimes she is a silent figure in the corner of a darkened room, eyes fixed on you with sorrow or judgment. Sometimes she is a child, not a mother at all, weeping in a forgotten corner of the psyche because she, too, was never held. The images arise, not from your will, but from the deeper terrain of your soul. And your task is simple, though not easy. Stay, speak, listen. If rage comes, let it. If fear rises, name it. If grief floods your chest, do not shut it down. This is the encounter. You are not there to fix her. You are there to finally witness what was never seen. Von Franz taught that these images carry intelligence. They are not symbols to be decoded, but voices to be heard. You may ask her why she kept you small. You may tell her what it cost you. You may hear her speak of her own sorrow, her own chains. And you may find, in the depths of what once seemed monstrous, something unexpectedly human. The goal is not catharsis. It is integration. To bring back what was lost. To allow the ego and the unconscious to meet, not as enemies, but as parts of one whole self. This work cannot be faked. The unconscious knows when you are performing. It only opens to sincerity. And when it does, something shifts, not always dramatically, but undeniably. The grip of the complex loosens. The inner mother becomes less a tyrant and more a wounded figure, no longer holding the soul hostage. You emerge from this process changed, not because the mother has vanished, but because you have met her. The fear is still there, but it no longer rules. The sorrow still lingers, but it is no longer exiled. And in that space, something begins to grow. Sovereignty, not the absence of pain, but the presence of self. You have gone inward, and you have returned. That is the ritual. That is the alchemy. There comes a moment when the old longing must die. Not because it is wrong, but because it has run its course. The child within the one, still looking over her shoulder for the mother's nod, still waiting for the gesture that says, "You are enough," cannot lead your life. She can be honored, she can be heard, but she cannot stay in control. Marie-Louise von Franz knew this threshold intimately. She called it a psychic death, the painful but necessary collapse of the ego child, who was shaped by absence, shaped by hope, shaped by silence. This death is not dramatic, it is quiet. It arrives in the pause after yet another attempt to be good enough has failed. It lives in the hollow ache that no amount of pleasing or achieving can fill. And when you stop trying, when you finally stop bargaining with ghosts, something in you crumbles. The illusion breaks. You see it for what it is. A life built not from freedom, but from adaptation. You adapted to her moods. You adapted to her absence. You adapted so well, you forgot who you were before the adapting began. Von Franz taught that true transformation begins at the edge of annihilation, not the death of the body, but the death of the psychic scaffolding that once held your identity together. The idea that love must be earned, that approval equals safety, that to become yourself is to betray the one who gave you life. These myths must fall. And when they do, it feels like a kind of death. Because it is. But death is not the end in depth psychology. It is the beginning. When the ego child dies, what rises is not emptiness, it is the self. Not the self-image, not the performance, but the deep and sovereign center of your being. The one who does not need to be chosen, because they have already chosen themselves. The one who does not need to prove worth, because worth is now a given, not a prize. This birth is not euphoric. It is grounded. It comes with grief, and reverence, and a strange kind of silence, the kind that means something has shifted. You are no longer orbiting the mother's gaze. You are no longer repeating her wound in every relationship. You are no longer building your life as a reaction to the past. You are responding to something new, your own inner authority. Von Franz saw this emergence as sacred. The child bows, the adult stands. The soul, no longer waiting to be seen, begins to see itself, and in that gaze, everything begins to change. Not because the past disappears, but because you are no longer bound by it. You are no longer living for her. You are finally living as you. The feminine, once feared, must be invited home. Not the gendered roles, not the cultural performance of softness, but the true feminine, wild, intuitive, feeling, embodied. The part of you that knows without needing to explain. The part that rests without shame. The part that creates not for approval, but because life demands it. Marie-Louise von Franz saw how the wounding of the mother complex fractures the inner feminine, leaving behind not just a mother-shaped void, but an exile of the soul's most vital instincts. When the mother cannot hold her own feminine, the child learns to mistrust hers. You learn to suppress feeling, to question your knowing, to trade rest for performance. You begin to associate softness with danger, receptivity with weakness, sensuality with guilt. The inner split becomes a survival strategy. And you forget that what was silenced in her is still alive in you, waiting not for permission, but for reclamation. Reclaiming the feminine is not a return to the mother. It is a return to yourself, not to the one who performed for love, but to the one who felt deeply before she was told it was too much. This is where the healing begins. When you no longer confuse love with erasure. When you no longer apologize for your intuition. When you dare to mother yourself. Self-mothering is not indulgence. It is revolution. It is saying, I will no longer wait for someone else to soothe me, to feed me, to see me. I will become the one who stays, the one who listens when I cry, the one who trusts my no, the one who knows how to say yes to joy without earning it. This is not becoming your mother. It is becoming the mother she never had, the one who lives in you now. Von Franz knew this work could not be done from the intellect. It had to be lived in the body, felt in the breath, chosen again and again in the smallest acts, feeding yourself when you'd rather disappear, resting when the voice of guilt calls you lazy, touching your own skin as if it were sacred, letting yourself grieve without rushing to fix. This is what it means to return to the feminine, not to a fantasy, but to a living presence. You do not reclaim the feminine through force. You reclaim it by remembering it was never lost, only buried, only silenced, only waiting. And as you learn to hold yourself the way no one ever did, something shifts. Not quickly, but quietly. The inner split begins to mend. The child who thought she had to choose between freedom and love finds something new, a place where both can live. And in that place, the feminine breathes again. Separation, when done consciously, is not an act of rebellion. It is a sacred right. In Jungian thought, and in the deeper reflections of Marie-Louise von Franz, the true journey of the soul begins with a rupture from the parental imago, from the inherited myths, from the unconscious fusion that once felt like love. This separation does not begin with distance. It begins with a moment of clarity. I am not her. I am not his. I am not the child they needed me to be. The parental imago is not your mother or father as people. It is their psychic imprint, an inner figure composed of memory, longing, fear, and projection. You internalized it before you had language. It shaped how you moved, how you spoke, how you imagined safety. And unless brought to light, it continues to speak for you. You think it's your voice, your values, your fear, but it's theirs, wearing your face. Von Franz knew the danger of staying too long in unconscious loyalty. She saw that the soul begins to dim when it is forced to choose between truth and belonging. And so the work becomes this: to step out from under the shadow of the inherited script and build something of your own, not in hatred, not in spite, but in reverence for what must evolve. The ego no longer waits to be chosen. It chooses, not with arrogance, but with quiet authority. This is individuation, not a flight from the family, but a turning inward toward the self, the deep center of being that carries your blueprint, your knowing, your voice uncorrupted by fear. It does not speak loudly, it does not compete, it waits. And when you begin to listen, the old narratives lose their grip. The story that said you had to be good to be loved. The rule that warned you never to outshine. The myth that said survival means self-erasure. They begin to crumble. You do not need to hate the mother to leave her image behind. You do not need to reject your past to choose your future. The sacred separation is subtler than that. It is the moment you stop performing, the moment you feel the guilt rise, and you do not obey it, the moment you speak with your full voice and do not shrink to make others comfortable. That is when the self begins to live through you. Not the ego clinging to identity, but the soul expressing essence. Von Franz saw this as the deepest task: to become who you are without asking permission, to live a life that answers to the inner call, not the inherited command. That is the real separation. Not distance but freedom. Not rebellion but return. Not abandonment but arrival. Wholeness is not what you think it is. It's not a feeling of lightness, or the sudden absence of pain. It's not the moment you finally forgive her. It's the moment you no longer need to, because something deeper than forgiveness has taken root. Clarity. Freedom, the quiet understanding that your life no longer belongs to the past. The mother wound, once wrapped around your voice, your choices, your sense of self, begins to loosen, not because you've erased it, but because you've faced it, fully, without flinching. Marie-Louise von Franz wrote, "Only by facing the archetype directly can the individual become real, and this is what you have done. You did not bypass it with stories. You did not bury it beneath spiritual platitudes or inherited duty. You turned inward. You entered the labyrinth. You sat across from the mother, not just the woman, but the image, the myth, the force, and you stayed. You listened, you wept, you said the words you were never allowed to say, and because of that, you are not who you were. Wholeness is not the absence of a mother wound, it is the integration of it. It is the ability to hold the full truths. She did what she could, and it was not enough. She loved, and she harmed. She tried, and she failed. And now, you choose to stop carrying what was never yours to hold. You do not need to punish her. You do not need to rescue her. You do not need to wait for her to understand that waiting is over, because your life has begun. To live beyond the mother is to live as a conscious ancestor. It is to end what was passed down through silence and shame. It is to say, this story stops with me. No more daughters who disappear. No more sons who confuse love with servitude. No more souls traded for survival. You do not rewrite history. You break the loop. And in doing so, you become what she could not be: whole, sovereign, awake. You do not need to be grateful for the pain, but you can be grateful for the truth it forced you to see, that your worth was never in question, that your voice is holy, that your story is your own. And in this space, something long buried begins to move: the feminine, the creative, the wild, the wise, not because it was lost, but because you are no longer hiding from it. This is what von Franz pointed to again and again: not perfection, not purity, reality. A life lived from the center, not from the wound. You do not heal to return to who you were before the pain. You heal to become who you were before the silence. And now, the silence is over. The archetype has been faced. The child has been buried. The adult has been born. And she belongs to no one but herself.